Easy it hurts. The nun moaned. Against the current, the mountain man did the unthinkable. The wind whipped across the mountain pass, carrying the scent of pine and cold stone. The small village at the foot of the mountains was quiet in the early morning, with only the occasional crow or distant bark breaking the silence. Life in the village had always been simple. People worked the land, cared for their families, and followed traditions passed down through generations. But in recent months, there had been whispers of change, stories of someone brave enough, or perhaps foolish enough, to challenge what was considered impossible. Among the villagers, the most talked-about figure was a man they called simply the Mountain Man. He lived alone on the upper slopes, in a small cabin made of rough timber and stone. Few had ever been inside, and fewer still had ever seen him descend into the village. Children dared each other to run to the edge of the forest and glimpse the smoke from his chimney, while adults told stories of his feats as if he were a legend from another time. Some said he had once survived a storm that had flattened entire forests, while others claimed he had carried supplies up steep cliffs that no ordinary person could scale. But the Mountain Man was not famous for glory. He was famous because he seemed to exist on the edge of danger, moving through life with a calm certainty that others found both inspiring and frightening. He spoke little, but when he did, people listened. His words were measured and thoughtful, always carrying weight, as if he had learned lessons most others had to discover the hard way. On this particular morning, the sun had barely risen, painting the snow-dusted peaks in soft gold and pink. The Mountain Man was already awake, packing his few belongings for a journey. He had decided to cross a difficult stretch of the mountains, one that villagers often avoided because of hidden cliffs and sudden weather changes. His reason was simple, yet pressing. He needed to deliver a message to the next village, one that could not wait. Every minute mattered, and he knew the risks. As he stepped outside, the cold bit at his skin, sharp but familiar. His boots crunched over the frost-covered ground as he checked the straps on his backpack and adjusted the rope coiled at his side. He paused for a moment, looking back toward the village below. Smoke curled gently from chimneys, and a few early risers moved about their work, unaware of the journey that was about to begin. He felt a twinge of connection, a reminder that even someone who lived apart from the world still belonged to it. The path ahead was treacherous. Narrow ledges clung to cliffs, and hidden patches of ice could turn a simple step into disaster. The Mountain Man moved carefully, his movements precise and deliberate. He had learned to trust his instincts, to feel the mountain rather than see it. Every rock, every tree, every gust of wind spoke to him in a language only he seemed to understand. As he climbed higher, the village below began to shrink into a patchwork of roofs and fields. Clouds began to form around the peaks, swirling and thickening. The wind grew stronger, tugging at his clothes and pulling at his balance. Yet he pressed on, each step taken with purpose. He knew that hesitation here could be dangerous, but recklessness was equally perilous. Along the way, he encountered small signs of life. A hare darted across the snow, leaving delicate tracks in its wake. A lone bird circled high above, calling out to the wind. These small moments reminded him that even in isolation, life persisted. They gave him a strange comfort, a sense that the world was still moving, still connected, even in the most remote corners. As midday approached, the Mountain Man reached a narrow ridge that overlooked a deep valley. The drop was steep, almost vertical in places, but the path continued along the edge. He paused, taking a moment to study the terrain. He could see the distant village where he would deliver his message, but between him and it lay dangerous terrain and unpredictable weather. The clouds were darkening, a sign that a storm could arrive at any moment. He tightened the straps on his backpack and secured the rope at his side. In his mind, he went over the route, visualizing each step, each turn, each potential hazard. This was not the first time he had faced such conditions, but each journey was unique and mistakes could be costly. He had learned long ago that preparation and focus were as important as courage. Suddenly, a gust of wind swept across the ridge, stronger than the ones before. It pushed against him, testing his balance. He leaned into it, planting his feet firmly, feeling the earth beneath him. The wind carried a warning, but he was ready. With careful steps, he continued along the edge, moving past jagged rocks and narrow ledges. Every step demanded attention, but he moved with confidence born from experience. By late afternoon, the weather had begun to change more noticeably. The wind was colder, sharper, and the clouds had thickened into a heavy gray. Snowflakes began to fall, swirling around him in small, icy bursts. Visibility was becoming limited, but the mountain man pressed on. His focus narrowed to each step, each hold, each breath. He was aware of the danger, but he did not allow fear to dictate his actions. As the sun began to dip toward the horizon, he reached a small outcropping that provided some shelter. He paused to rest, removing his backpack and checking his supplies. There was enough food and water for the journey, but he knew he had to keep moving. The storm could worsen quickly, and the path ahead was long and unforgiving. He ate a small portion of bread and cheese, sipping water carefully. Even these simple acts felt like small victories against the harsh environment. While resting, his mind wandered briefly to the villagers below. They had no idea of the conditions he faced, no understanding of the risks. But that was how life often worked. Some people lived quietly, safely, unaware of the trials others endured. The mountain man had long ago accepted that his path was different, that his challenges were not theirs to share. He had chosen this life of solitude and risk, and he embraced it fully. Night began to fall, and the temperature dropped further. He packed up quickly, knowing that the next stretch would be the most difficult. The path narrowed again, cliffs rose on either side, and the wind howled with greater force. Every step had to be deliberate, every movement controlled. Yet, despite the danger, he felt a strange exhilaration. There was a clarity in the challenge, a sense of being fully alive in the face of the mountain's might. As darkness settled, he used a small lantern to light his path, its warm glow contrasting with the cold and shadow. The journey was far from over, but he had made significant progress. Each obstacle overcome strengthened his resolve. Each hazard navigated reaffirmed his skill and determination. He was aware that the next day could bring unforeseen difficulties, but for now, he had survived another stage. Finally, he found a flat area where he could safely rest for the night. He built a small fire, careful to keep it contained, and warmed himself against the cold. The sound of the wind and the crackle of the fire created a strange, comforting rhythm. Alone in the vastness of the mountains, he felt a deep connection to the world around him, a reminder that even in isolation, life had its moments of beauty and reflection. As he lay down to rest, the mountain man thought of the journey ahead. It would not be easy, and the challenges were far from over. But he knew that courage, preparation, and focus would carry him forward. The mountain demanded respect, but it also offered reward, a chance to prove one's strength, to test one's limits, and to move forward against the current, no matter how difficult. With that thought, he closed his eyes, the firelight flickering over his tired but determined face. The mountain was alive around him, full of dangers, mysteries, and possibilities, and the mountain man was ready to meet them all, step by careful step, The morning air was crisp and cold when the mountain man woke. The fire he had built the night before had burned down to glowing embers, leaving a faint warmth against the icy wind. He stretched, feeling the stiffness in his muscles from the climb the day before. His body ached slightly, but this was normal. Pain was a reminder that he was alive, moving, and pushing forward. He packed up his small camp carefully, extinguishing the last embers of the fire so nothing could escape into the dry grass and cause trouble. Every movement was practiced, precise, and thoughtful. Living in the mountains had taught him that even the smallest mistake could cause big problems. He slung his backpack over his shoulder and checked his rope one last time. The path ahead was steep, with rocky ledges and hidden slopes, but he was ready. As he climbed higher, the wind blew stronger. It rushed down from the peaks, cutting through his clothing and nipping at his skin. He tightened his jacket and moved with steady, deliberate steps. His boots found purchase on the frozen earth, and his eyes scanned the terrain ahead. The mountain man had learned to trust what he could not see. Snow could hide loose rocks, ice could appear without warning, and shadows could hide gaps that might trip even the most careful traveler. Around midday, he reached a narrow pass flanked by cliffs. The valley below was deep, shrouded in mist, and the peaks stretched high above, piercing the gray sky. Here, the mountain man paused for a moment, taking in the view. The world seemed both endless and fragile from this height. Tiny villages and forests appeared distant and unreal, almost like a painting from another time. He took a small sip of water and rested briefly, feeling the sun on his face. Even the cold morning had a warmth when the sun touched the snow. He continued along the ridge, moving with care. The path became more difficult. Rocks jutted out at odd angles, forcing him to step carefully, and narrow ledges meant that one misstep could lead to disaster. Yet, he moved steadily, relying on both skill and patience. Every careful movement brought him closer to his goal. The journey was not just about distance. It was about focus, strength, and perseverance. As he moved, he noticed the subtle signs of wildlife. A fox paused on a distant slope, watching him before disappearing into the trees. Tracks of deer marked the snow, evidence that life moved quietly around him. These small glimpses reminded him that he was never truly alone. Nature, in all its beauty and unpredictability, shared the mountain with him. It was both a challenge and a companion, demanding respect while offering lessons. By late afternoon, the clouds began to gather more densely. A faint gray mist hung over the peaks, and the wind picked up, howling through the rocks and trees. The mountain man moved with care, aware that weather could change quickly in these heights. He knew from experience that a sudden storm could make a dangerous pass nearly impossible to cross. He adjusted his backpack, secured his rope, and pressed on, keeping his focus on each step. The pass opened to a plateau, a flat area that offered a temporary reprieve from the steep slopes. He stopped here to eat, taking out bread and dried fruit from his pack. Even as he ate, his mind worked, planning the next stretch of the journey. This was the trickiest part of the mountain. Hidden cliffs, sudden drops, and shifting snow could test even the most experienced traveler. But he had prepared, and preparation was half the battle. As he rested, he noticed a small stream nearby, partially frozen, but still flowing. The sound of water running over rocks was calming, almost meditative. He knelt to drink, letting the cold water refresh him. There was something in the mountain's quiet power that made him feel alive in a way he never experienced in the village. Here, every choice mattered, and every action carried weight. He was fully present, fully aware, fully alive. After resting, he continued his climb. The plateau ended in a series of steep rocks leading to another ridge. He moved carefully, testing each foothold before committing his weight. The wind tugged at him and loose stones shifted beneath his boots, but he pressed forward. Every step was deliberate, every movement intentional. The mountain man had learned that patience and attention were stronger than speed. The mountain could only be conquered one careful step at a time. Evening approached and the sky darkened. He found a small cave in the rocks, offering shelter from the cold and wind. Inside, he set up a small fire, careful to keep it contained. The warmth was comforting, and he used the time to examine his gear, ensuring everything was in order. The path ahead was still difficult, and he knew that he could not afford to be unprepared. As night fell, the mountain man sat quietly, listening to the wind and the faint sounds of the mountain around him. The stillness of the night was powerful, almost sacred. Stars appeared through breaks in the clouds, shining like distant fires in the dark sky. He thought about the villages below, about the people who might be waiting for his message, and about the journey still ahead. The mountain tested him, but it also gave him perspective. Life, he realized, was a series of challenges to be met with courage and patience. During the night, the wind shifted and snow began to fall lightly, coating the rocks outside the cave. The mountain man watched from the entrance, feeling the cold on his face. He knew that the storm could grow stronger, but he also knew that he had prepared as best he could. He would continue in the morning, trusting his skill and his experience to guide him. By dawn, the snow had settled into a soft layer, covering the plateau and making the rocks slippery. The mountain man took a deep breath, feeling the crisp air fill his lungs. He adjusted his backpack, checked his rope, and stepped carefully into the snow. Each step required focus. Each movement demanded precision. Yet, despite the challenge, he moved with confidence. The mountain, with all its difficulties, had become a companion. It demanded respect, but it rewarded those who listened and acted with care. As he climbed higher, the mountain man noticed the landscape changing. Trees became sparse, replaced by jagged rocks and icy slopes. The air grew thinner, making each breath a little harder. But he did not falter. He had climbed mountains before, faced storms, and survived where others might have turned back. The challenge only strengthened his resolve. By midday, he reached a point where he could see the next village far below. It was still a long way off, but he had made significant progress. The journey had tested him, but he felt stronger, more focused, more alive. He paused for a moment, looking at the distant roofs and fields, and felt a sense of purpose. Every step he took mattered, not just for himself, but for the people who might rely on him. The mountain man continued moving, navigating rocky ledges and icy slopes. The snow crunched beneath his boots, and the wind howled around him. He felt the fatigue in his legs and the sting of cold in his fingers, but he pressed on. His focus was absolute, his mind sharp. He was aware of every step, every sound, every shift in the wind. The mountain demanded attention, and he gave it willingly. By evening, he found another sheltered spot, a natural alcove in the rocks. Here he rested, setting up a small fire and eating the last of his provisions. The night was cold and long, but he felt prepared. He reflected on the day's journey, on the small victories and challenges overcome. The mountain had tested him, but he had met its challenge with courage and skill. As he lay down to rest, he thought about the journey ahead. The next village was still far, and the path would not become easier. But he felt ready, confident in his abilities, and determined to see the journey through. The mountain was a test, but it was also a teacher, and he had learned much in a single day. He closed his eyes, listening to the wind and the quiet sounds of the night. The mountain surrounded him, alive and powerful. And the mountain man, alone but determined, was ready to continue step by careful step toward the unknown challenges of the next day. The sun rose slowly over the mountain peaks, casting pale light across the snowy slopes. The mountain man had spent a restless night, listening to the wind sweep through the rocks and the faint rustle of snow settling over the landscape. Though he had slept, it had been a light sleep, his mind alert to every sound and movement. By morning, he felt ready. The day promised new challenges, and he welcomed them. He packed his camp carefully, as he always did, making sure his rope was coiled neatly and his backpack secure. The wind had dropped slightly, but the air was still cold and sharp. He adjusted his jacket and took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill his lungs. Every step forward was a test of focus, balance, and strength. He knew the mountain demanded nothing less than full attention. The path ahead was steep and narrow, cutting across a series of rocky ridges. He moved slowly, deliberately, checking each foothold before committing his weight. The snow under his boots sometimes gave way, revealing hidden rocks beneath, but he adapted quickly. Years of experience had taught him patience and the value of careful observation. He could read the mountain like a book, sensing where the rocks were stable and where the slopes were dangerous. As he climbed higher, the mountain opened up into a vast frozen expanse. The wind howled across the plateau, and clouds swirled around the peaks like ghostly figures. It was beautiful, almost otherworldly, but it reminded him that the mountain could be as dangerous as it was breathtaking. The mountain man tightened his grip on his rope, feeling the weight of his responsibility. This journey was not just a test of endurance, it was a mission. There were people depending on him, and he could not fail. Despite the cold and isolation, he felt a sense of calm as he moved. The mountain had a rhythm, a flow that he had learned to follow. Every gust of wind, every crunch of snow, every shadow of a rock was part of a pattern. He had learned to trust it. Moving along the frozen expanse, he felt the connection between himself and the world around him. Here, life was simple, one step at a time, one choice after another. The mountain offered no shortcuts, no easy paths, and he respected that. By mid-morning, he reached a small cluster of jagged rocks. These rocks created a natural obstacle, forcing him to climb carefully over uneven surfaces. Each step required focus, as one false move could send him sliding down the slope. He used his rope to steady himself in a few places, looping it around sturdy rocks and tying secure knots. His movements were deliberate and steady, a careful dance between caution and progress. As he climbed, he spotted movement below. A small herd of mountain goats navigated the cliffs with surprising ease. Their sure-footedness reminded him that the mountain was home to life that thrived in conditions most people would never survive. Watching them for a moment, he felt a sense of wonder. Life, no matter how harsh the environment, found a way. The sight gave him energy and a renewed sense of purpose. The climb continued for hours. The air grew thinner as he ascended, making each breath a little more difficult. His legs burned with exertion, but he welcomed it. The effort was a reminder that he was alive, that he was pushing his limits. The mountain man had learned to endure, to pace himself, to respect both his strengths and his limits. Every challenge on the mountain was an opportunity to test his skills, and he faced each one with determination. Around midday, the weather began to shift. Clouds thickened, and the temperature dropped. Snow started to fall lightly, dusting the rocks and adding a slippery layer to the path. He paused for a moment, adjusting his jacket and gloves. The mountain was changing, as it always did, and he needed to be ready. He reminded himself to stay calm, to trust his experience and to keep moving steadily. Panic or haste could be dangerous here. He found a small ledge to rest and eat a little. Pulling out a piece of bread and a few nuts from his pack, he took small bites while keeping an eye on the path ahead. Even simple acts like eating or drinking required awareness. One careless step while distracted could be disastrous. The mountain had taught him discipline, and he followed it without question. After eating, he continued climbing. The terrain became steeper and more jagged, with sharp rocks and narrow ledges. The wind increased, blowing snow into his face and making each step harder. He moved slowly, planting his feet carefully, testing each hold before committing his weight. It was exhausting, but he knew that slow and steady was safer than rushing. By mid-afternoon, he reached a ridge that offered a view of the valley below. The village he needed to reach was still far, but visible in the distance. Tiny houses and winding paths seemed insignificant from this height, but they reminded him of his goal. He had come far, but the journey was not over. The final stretch would be the hardest. The mountain had more challenges ahead, and he had to remain alert. He moved along the ridge, careful to avoid loose rocks and icy patches. The wind pushed against him strongly, threatening to throw off his balance. He leaned into it, using his strength and rope to steady himself. Every step required concentration. Every movement demanded care. The mountain tested his patience, endurance, and courage, but he was ready. As evening approached, the snow grew heavier. Visibility dropped, and shadows stretched across the rocks. He knew he needed to find shelter soon. Ahead, he spotted a natural overhang, a small cave-like formation in the rocks. It was not large, but it would provide protection from the wind and snow. Carefully, he made his way to it, feeling the relief of having a safe spot for the night. Inside the overhang, he built a small fire, shielding it from the wind. The warmth spread quickly, providing comfort against the cold and snow. He ate the last of his supplies, knowing that the next day would require careful rationing. The mountain was unforgiving, but preparation made survival possible. He reflected on the day's journey, the climbs, the wind, the snow, and felt pride in his perseverance. The night was long and the wind howled outside, but inside the overhang, he felt safe. He thought about the journey ahead, the village he needed to reach, and the people who might be counting on him. The mountain man knew that every choice he made mattered, and he was determined to continue, no matter how difficult the path became. As he lay down, listening to the storm outside, he felt a deep connection to the mountain. It was not just a challenge, it was a teacher. It demanded patience, focus, and courage, and in return it offered lessons about life, perseverance, and strength. He closed his eyes, ready to rest, knowing that the next day would bring new trials and new opportunities to overcome them. The morning light struggled to break through the thick clouds. The mountain man had barely slept, the wind outside whispering through the rocks, like a warning. He felt stiff from the previous day's climb, but there was no time to linger. The path ahead was the most difficult yet. The valley he needed to reach was close, but the mountain had saved its harshest challenge for last. He packed his small camp with practiced hands, coiling the rope carefully and checking every strap of his backpack. Even the smallest mistake could turn into a serious problem here. The snow had settled overnight, creating a soft but slippery layer over jagged rocks and hidden crevices. He tightened his boots, feeling the icy ground beneath his feet. Every step forward would demand focus and determination. The wind howled across the ridge as he began to climb. It cut through his jacket and chilled him to the bone, but he pressed on. The air was thinner here, making each breath a little more difficult, but he was used to the mountain's demands. He moved slowly, deliberately, testing every foothold, careful not to slip on the ice. The mountain had taught him patience, and he relied on it now more than ever. As he approached a narrow ledge, he paused. The drop below was steep and unforgiving, disappearing into clouds that rolled across the mountainside. One misstep could mean disaster. He studied the ledge, noting the rocks that were stable and the ones that might give way. Slowly he moved, placing his feet carefully and keeping his balance with the rope he carried. Each step required attention, each movement precision. Hours passed, and the climb became more treacherous. The wind gusted suddenly, pushing at him from the side. He leaned into it, bracing against the icy force. Snow swirled around him, reducing visibility, and the sun barely touched the ground through thick clouds. Yet, even with the danger, he felt a strange exhilaration. The mountain demanded respect, but it also rewarded those who met its challenges with skill and courage. Midday brought a small break in the clouds. The mountain man found a ledge wide enough to sit and eat a little. Pulling out bread and dried fruit, he paused to drink water. Even simple acts were careful in these conditions. A single slip could turn a small rest into a dangerous fall. He ate slowly, savoring each bite, and kept his eyes on the shifting clouds. The storm could return at any moment. After resting, he continued upward. The path became a series of jagged rocks and icy slopes. The snow had grown deeper, hiding crevices that could trap a foot and throw off balance. He tested each step, carefully placing his boots on secure surfaces and using the rope to steady himself across the trickiest stretches. Every step was deliberate, every breath controlled. The mountain tested him, but he had learned to meet its demands. By late afternoon, the clouds thickened again. A snowstorm began to form, lightly at first, then heavier. The wind whipped across the ridge, and the cold became sharper, biting through his gloves. He adjusted his jacket, pulled his hood tightly, and moved steadily forward. Even in the harshest conditions, he refused to give up. The mountain had forced him to respect it, and now it demanded his perseverance. He reached a particularly dangerous section, a narrow bridge of ice spanning a gap between two cliffs. Below, the drop seemed endless, swallowed by the clouds. One false step could be disastrous. The mountain man took a deep breath, visualizing each movement before he stepped forward. He placed the rope carefully, testing the ice beneath his boots. Slowly, deliberately, he crossed, inch by inch, feeling the cold beneath his fingers as he balanced against the wind. Once across, he paused to steady himself. His heart pounded, but he felt pride in his skill and caution. He had faced danger before, but this section tested him more than any other part of the journey. The mountain seemed alive, aware of his determination, and it was giving him a challenge worthy of respect. He moved on, more focused than ever, knowing that every careful step mattered. As evening approached, he found a small cave sheltered from the wind. Inside, he built a fire quickly, careful to contain it, and ate the last of his provisions. The warmth was comforting, and he took a moment to rest, feeling the weight of the day's climb. The snowstorm continued outside, the wind howling through cracks in the rock. He listened quietly, thinking about the final stretch. The village was close, but the last steps would be the hardest. The mountain man reflected on the journey so far. He had climbed steep slopes, crossed icy ridges, and faced the mountain's unpredictable weather. Each challenge had strengthened him, teaching patience, endurance, and focus. He thought about the people waiting for him in the village, about the importance of perseverance, and about the way life often required courage in the face of difficulty. Night fell, and the storm continued. He sat by the fire, feeling the heat against his cold skin. He checked his rope and backpack again, making sure everything was in order. The next day would be critical. The final stretch would test every skill he had, every lesson the mountain had taught him. He had prepared as best he could, but he knew that concentration and determination would be as important as strength. Morning came slowly, pale and gray. The storm had passed, leaving snow-dusted rocks and a sparkling layer of frost over the cliffs. The mountain man packed up and stepped carefully into the crisp morning. Every movement was deliberate, every step intentional. He knew the final climb would demand both courage and focus, and he was ready to meet it. The terrain became steeper, the air thinner, and the wind sharper. He used the rope to steady himself over particularly tricky sections and tested every foothold before putting his full weight down. The rocks were jagged, the ice slippery, but he moved steadily, trusting his experience. He had faced the mountain's worst before, and he was determined to succeed now. By midday, he reached a high ridge that offered a view of the valley below. The village he had been traveling toward was visible, nestled among trees and fields. It was far, yet closer than it had ever been. The sight filled him with a mix of relief and renewed determination. The journey was almost over, but he could not let his focus slip. The mountain demanded respect until the very end. He carefully descended the last steep slopes, feeling the burn in his legs and the icy wind against his face. Every step required attention, every movement deliberate. The mountain had tested him, but he had met its challenges with patience, skill, and determination. He was tired, but he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. He had persevered, and now he could see the goal within reach. By late afternoon, he reached the forested slopes leading to the village. The path became easier, the ground firmer, and the air warmer. The trees provided shelter from the wind, and he felt a sense of relief. The hardest part of the journey was behind him, and he could focus on reaching the village safely. The mountain man moved steadily, confident in his skill and the lessons the mountain had taught him. Finally, as the sun began to set, he reached the outskirts of the village. The journey was complete, but its challenges remained in his memory. Every step, every careful movement, every moment of focus had brought him here. He looked around at the familiar fields, the small houses, and the smoke rising from chimneys. The mountain was behind him, but its lessons would stay with him forever. The village came into full view as the mountain man descended the last slope. The trees swayed gently in the afternoon breeze, and smoke rose from a few chimneys, curling lazily into the sky. The hard, jagged mountain was behind him now, replaced by the gentle slopes and familiar paths of home. Even so, he did not relax completely. Every step on the soft ground was careful, steady, and deliberate. The mountain had taught him to respect every surface, every slope, and he would not forget its lessons so easily. The path wound through a small forest before opening onto the fields that led directly into the village. Birds sang from the trees, and the smell of damp earth and fresh grass filled the air. For a moment, the mountain man paused and looked around. He felt a strange mixture of relief, pride, and quiet joy. The journey had been long and challenging, yet every step had been worth it. He had faced the mountain's trials and had succeeded. As he entered the village, the familiar sights and sounds made him feel both comforted and proud. Children were playing near the stream, their laughter echoing in the crisp air. Farmers were returning from the fields, carrying bundles of firewood or harvested vegetables. Dogs barked in the distance, and the occasional cow wandered near the fences. Life continued here, calm and steady, unaware of the struggles the mountain man had faced above. He walked along the familiar paths, each step lighter than the one before. People began to notice him, nodding respectfully or greeting him with polite smiles. Though he had lived apart from the village for many years, his reputation as a brave and skilled mountain traveler had preceded him. They knew that someone who could survive the mountain's harshest challenges had earned a quiet respect that few could claim. He reached the center of the village, where an elderly man waited. The man had heard of the mountain man's journey and had come to meet him. His face lit up as he saw him approaching. "You made it," he said simply, his voice full of relief. "I knew you would." The mountain man nodded, a faint smile on his lips. "It was difficult, but I have learned much. The mountain tests everyone, but those who listen and move carefully can find their way through. This is for the people in the next village. They are waiting, and you have done what was necessary. You have made the journey when few others could." The mountain man took the bundle, feeling the weight of responsibility in his hands. It was not a large burden physically, but its importance was clear. Every step of the journey had led to this moment. He had navigated treacherous slopes, icy ridges, and fierce winds to deliver this message, and now, finally, it would reach those who needed it. He paused for a moment, looking around the village. The sun was beginning to set, casting a warm golden glow over the fields and rooftops. The hardships of the mountain seemed distant now, replaced by the gentle rhythm of village life. Children ran past him, their laughter ringing in the air, and he felt a quiet sense of peace. He had faced danger, and he had overcome it. He had moved against the mountain's current and succeeded. After a brief rest in the village, he prepared to continue to the next settlement. The path ahead was easier than the mountain had been, but he still approached it with the same careful attention. Every journey required focus, even when the obstacles were smaller. He walked steadily, taking in the familiar sights and sounds of the countryside. Birds flitted among the trees, and the wind carried the faint scent of flowers and fresh earth. Each step brought him closer to his goal. Along the way, he passed fields where farmers worked, offering a nod or a brief greeting to those he met. Some recognized him and spoke softly of his courage and perseverance. Though he preferred solitude, the mountain man appreciated the small connections along the path. Even brief encounters reminded him that journeys were not only about survival, but also about connection and shared human experience. By late afternoon, he reached a gentle hill overlooking the next village. He paused to look down, noting the small houses clustered near the river and the fields beyond. This village, though unfamiliar, felt welcoming from afar. He descended carefully, moving along the winding path that led to the village's edge. The terrain was forgiving compared to the mountain, but he maintained the same focus that had guided him through the hardest climbs. When he entered the village, he was greeted with curiosity and respect. The people had heard of the traveler who had come from the mountains, carrying a message of importance. They watched quietly as he approached the village center and delivered the bundle to the local leader. The mountain man explained briefly the journey and the care required to reach this point. The villagers listened attentively, clearly impressed by his perseverance and skill. The local leader nodded with gratitude. "You have done more than we could have hoped," he said. Your courage and determination have brought this message safely. You have shown what patience and focus can achieve, even against great challenges." The mountain man simply nodded, feeling a quiet satisfaction. There was no need for praise. The journey itself had been its own reward. The lessons learned, the obstacles overcome, and the sense of purpose fulfilled were enough. He had faced the mountain, and he had triumphed through careful attention, strength, and determination. After ensuring the message had been received, he took a moment to rest by the river. The water flowed gently, reflecting the colors of the setting sun. He dipped his hands into the cold, clear stream, feeling the refreshing flow. The journey had tested him physically and mentally, but now he felt a deep sense of accomplishment. Each challenge had been overcome, each risk carefully navigated, and the goal had been reached. As the sun disappeared behind distant hills, the mountain man looked back toward the mountains. They loomed silently in the distance, powerful and imposing. He had moved against their current, faced their trials, and learned their lessons. The mountain had tested him, and he had met the challenge. He felt a deep respect for their strength and a quiet pride in his perseverance. He walked through the village one last time before nightfall, noting the warmth of homes and the peaceful routines of the people. Children played by the river, families worked in their homes, and the world moved forward steady and calm. For the mountain man, the journey had been both a test and a teacher. He had discovered the strength within himself, the importance of careful focus, and the rewards of patience and determination. As night fell, he found a quiet spot on a hill just outside the village. Sitting there, he looked up at the stars beginning to appear in the clear night sky. The journey was complete, the mission fulfilled, and yet he felt no need for celebration. The quiet satisfaction of achievement and the deep understanding of what he had endured were enough. The mountain and its challenges had shaped him, and now he carried their lessons forward. The mountain man rested, feeling the cool night air and the soft sounds of the village below. The wind whispered through the trees, gentle now, no longer harsh or threatening. He reflected on the journey, the early climbs, the harsh winds, the icy ledges, and the treacherous ridges. Each challenge had been met with careful thought, courage, and focus. He had moved forward step by step, overcoming obstacles and fulfilling his purpose. In the stillness of the night, he felt a sense of peace. The journey had tested him, but it had also taught him the value of perseverance, the strength found in careful attention, and the quiet rewards of determination. He had faced the mountain, the storm, and the challenges of isolation, and he had succeeded. The lessons of the journey would remain with him forever, shaping his future steps and guiding him through any challenge yet to come. Finally, as he closed his eyes under the stars, the mountain man felt complete. The mission was accomplished, the journey ended, and he had proven both to himself and to the world the power of courage, focus, and endurance. The mountain's trials were behind him, and the world lay ahead, full of possibilities. He had moved against the current, faced the impossible, and emerged stronger, wiser, and fulfilled.